We're rolling?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Welcome to an emergency edition of the Anabolic Opera Bros. Samuel, what did you just finish this last week?
I just finished the Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky.
Yes, preamble to this discussion, we're going to butcher every Russian name in the book.
As soon as I was saying, I was like, I'm going to say this wrong.
I think that's right, but who knows, really? We're going to do our best here. This is a book that I have read twice. In the second reading of it, I remember vividly texting you at a certain point, I think during Dmitri's book 3, scene 3 moment, where he's in the gazebo, and he's like drunkenly, crazily going through like the Ode to Joy.
Oh, yeah.
And that's when I texted you, I was like, you have to read this book. You just have to read it.
Yeah.
It's so good. The first time around, I actually kind of, I don't want to say I missed that part, but I wasn't like fully engaged with it in the moment. So then Sam started reading it, and I kind of suspected that during his cut, it would help in a spiritual way.
It certainly did.
Because the book is extremely spiritual, especially the first. Well, the whole thing is, but the first half is a, I would say in a certain way, we'll get into this, a kind of statement from Dostoevsky about what his religion is, or his takeaway from the Christian experience, anyway. Yes, you just said it before we started talking, and I actually thought about it before we were walking over here, that when people use the word, when people say something is biblical, I think, and I was trying to narrow it down, what that means exactly. Yes, I'm trying to narrow it down. It doesn't mean that the book is the Bible in like a Christian way, like it's not another gospel, because it's not, people use the term biblical in anything that is epic, I would say.
Yeah, I was going to say, anything like grand on a huge scale.
And I think the reason is, I think what it means to be biblical is to capture such an impressive amount of the totality of human experience across a broad range of temperaments, and to also like have some depth attached to those things. They're not just a bunch of stock characters or stock emotions or stock narratives. They're unique. They're unique in their own way.
Mm-hmm. And
I'm going to steal now from something I think I read Fitzgerald write about once, that in going very deep into the uniqueness of a character, or a tangential
that's the word,
story.
Tangential.
If you go into it with uniqueness and detail and truth, that what will emerge from that is a universality, because ultimately we're not also different from each other, and our experiences are not also different from each other, and we all have them to a certain degree, and so we can better understand, we can understand them better than certain theories might suggest at the moment. And so
understood.
So with that as a preamble, let's get into it. It's worth saying that there is a passage in the Zosima book, which a book critic, I don't know who exactly, because it's in the back notes of both of our editions, says is the philosophical touchstone of the piece.
Wow, yeah.
And I just want to read that passage, or maybe even a little bit before. Yes. This is on page 320 if you have the Peviar-Volokonsky translation. It's Bible study, here we go.
That's what it feels like.
And there is much in the strongest feelings and impulses of our nature that we cannot comprehend while on earth. Do not be tempted by that either, and do not think it can serve you as justification for anything, for the eternal judge will demand of you that which you could comprehend, not that which you could not. You will be convinced of that, for then you will see all things aright and no longer argue. But on earth we are indeed wandering, as it were, and did we not have the precious image of Christ before us, we would perish and be altogether lost, like the race of men before the flood. Much on earth is concealed from us, but in place of it we have been granted a secret, mysterious sense of our living bond with the other world, with the higher heavenly world, and the roots of our thoughts and feelings are not here, but in other worlds. That is why philosophers say it is impossible on earth to conceive the essence of things. God took seeds from the other worlds and sowed them on this earth, and raised up his garden. And everything that could sprout, sprouted. But it lives and grows only through its sense of being in touch with other mysterious worlds. If this sense is weakened or destroyed in you, that which has grown up in you dies. Then you become indifferent to life and even come to hate it. So I think. So that is actually not the conclusion of the Zosima book, but it's been argued that that is a good representation of, I guess, Zosima's overarching. He's a character in the book. His overarching theology, although it's tricky whether it's a theology or philosophy necessarily.
Yeah.
That's kind of actually the thing about this book, is it's tricky if it's theological or philosophical, more or less. I would argue that its most universal reading would be through a philosophical lens,
mm-hmm.
and not a theological lens, because you inevitably end up then with the problem of having to accept Christianity as a belief system in order to then accept Dostoevsky's genius, because it's his genius and his experience is told through Christian language and characters, I would say.
Yeah.
But I don't believe, and I'm saying this selfishly as a non-Christian, I don't believe that you can possibly get the full genius of Dostoevsky if you read it as a theological text. And there is an overlap between theology and philosophy. But if you can somehow bring to your heart the idea that what he means, for example, when he references the image of Christ as the thing to follow, then if you're able to define what that image is, and Christ being probably to me, and then I want you to tell me what it represents to you. But at least in the context where how Dostoevsky is using Christ, it's a figure that represents the ultimate of love and sacrifice and truth. That's how I understand Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And also that there's a part of him that, because he has those things, that he takes on a divine quality. Now that is a non-Christian, I would say, version of that. Because the Christian version is, well, of course he's divine. He's the Son of God.
Right.
I think it makes it too narrow if you go that route. And you couldn't possibly take Karamazov in all of its glory if you went that route. I don't think.
Yeah.
And a lot of the book is actually, I want to say, like, it's like you get the template for Christ, and then you get Alyosha.
Right.
Whose divinity is not God-given, but instead is a result of his love, truth, and what was the other one I said? Sacrifice.
Yeah, there you go.
And there's probably more qualities as well. But I want you, because as you know, I sort of am, I could say, part of my quest is to understand the power of the Christ figure as a non-Christian.
Right.
But is it different for you when he keeps referencing Christ in the book?
When I was reading this, I thought of it as a more philosophical text, like he said. There are some theological parts, God is referenced a lot, but I as someone who's just been raised Christian my whole life, gone to church, went to Christian school, I still consider myself to some degree not a great Christian because I don't go to church every Sunday, but as still as someone who's very spiritual, believes in God, believes in Jesus Christ, it's not much different for me, I have to say. It's still I look at Christ as this is the model of how a human being should live their life. And that's the same for a Christian as for, I think, a non-Christian. Now, when I pray in the morning, and I pray to God, and this is kind of my own way of thinking about it, I think of God not only as, you know, the heavenly creator. I also think of God as the wise mind. I think of God's wisdom imparting to me. I think when I calm my mind, when I am quiet and alone, and I can really use my mind, use my consciousness, that's kind of how I also see God. I also see God as consciousness in a way. And if I go any further trying to talk about consciousness, I'm going to lose myself because it's too complicated. But as far as Jesus goes, it's almost like I myself pray to God and also use that prayer as a meditation to be like, how can I be more like Christ today? How can I be more loving? How can I let God's light shine through me to others? And that's something that, like you said, the love, the truth, the sacrifice, something that Alyosha does all throughout the book. How graceful and merciful he is with everyone. And open and never, like, he could be so much more judgmental of his brothers. He could be way less receptive than he is to their ideas, but he's not.
The beauty of Alyosha, and I think one of the things that a lot of Russian literature is trying to get at, especially Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, that's been my experience, is how fundamental the practice of understanding is to loving. And then if you start to practice that in your daily life, there's a scary thing that happens, which is, well, first of all, understanding, one thing that's important about understanding is that it very much depends on the ability to listen And listening is not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not.
Because, in every conversation, there's like there's this impulse to say the thing that maybe the first part of somebody's sentence sparked in you something that you wanted to say. Or maybe even worse, you already knew what you wanted to say way before they talked, way before even maybe you got to that point, but you've been storing it up the whole time.
Yep.
And then that pressure of that thing that you really wanted to say and process through your own speech might interfere or just cloud over the whole point of the discussion, which was bigger than that thing that you had to say by a long shot.
Yeah.
So anyway, the skill of listening is important to understanding. If you get to that point where you can just receive from another human being, you often find yourself I think a couple of things happen. One is that they say things to you that surprise you, because you've like Alyosha. It's not that Alyosha doesn't judge necessarily. It's that his process of judgment doesn't come with the punishment of the person he's speaking with. So somebody's confession to Alyosha doesn't result in him berating them,
Right.
telling them that it's wrong, especially because Alyosha knows that they know it's wrong too, if it's something that they're confessing. There's other than his own pride or compulsion towards superciliousness, there would be no reason to then berate them for having done wrong. Because the act of confession is in fact an indicator that they know. You don't have to tell them.
Exactly.
Again. But so the person, your interlocutor? Yes. I think that's how you say it. Interlocutor ends up trusting you because they know that they can tell you things and that they can process their life in a way that is going to be received lovingly, dare I say. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have a romantic love for them, or even that you love them that much as a person, but the act of listening well and understanding is an act of love. So it does feel loving when someone does it for you. So they're going to have a really sacred thing in the person that they're speaking with, if it's Alyosha-like. And then also, the Alyosha, the listener, finds themselves inevitably, yes, I want to say loving the person who's making the confession because they understand them so well. And even though their action, they might judge their action in such a way that they wouldn't want to repeat it, or they would hope that that person doesn't do it again if it's a bad thing. But they're revealing their thought process, which kind of reveals the ground for where their emotion comes from. And when you get to that level with somebody, it's hard not to feel brotherly with them or very much linked with them, because it's a very human thing, and that kind of, I'd say, links to that touchstone Zosima quote, that it's sort of something that links us in this mysterious part of consciousness that for some reason, as soon as people are able to remember that we're all there, so much of that negative tension goes away. Which is why there's this huge wondering and theorizing about, is the act of understanding, the willingness to understand the path towards a more loving world. I guess I won't make a conclusive statement on that, but I definitely sense that's a huge part of what Dostoevsky talks about in the book. So then going back to, I guess, the Alyosha and Christ. Okay, I know what I was going to say. We're talking about Christ. The problem with this mysterious other part of consciousness that isn't science, that isn't the material, is that it's an experience that's very hard to talk about without going into abstract language. And the language that we've inherited as 21st century young men is, I think it's been distilled to its most definitive form through religious text almost. It's hard to describe the experience of, you can't even say it. I'll say it in very rigid terms, and then talk about the words that we usually use to describe those things. Okay.
Right.
So you are in Central Park, and it's 9:45 p.m. and you're on the northwest side of the Ramble. Or is it the Bramble? Okay.
I think it's the Ramble.
Ramble. There's a little bridge that looks over that body of water, which I forget the name of that body of water. The other one up north is the Onassis Reservoir. Yeah. This body of water I forget. But there's a little bridge there, and the water it opens up like this if you're looking at it in a southern direction, and you can see the whole skyline of the part of Manhattan that borders basically 59th Street. Yeah. And the water is reflecting that light. Surrounding the water, you have trees all around on one side, and then you have a path, a little bit of distance, and more nature on the other side. And usually at that time at night, it's very, very silent. And you're in this park that's you're in this huge space that has a lot of significance to the place that you live in. And there's this beauty of nature surrounding you. And there's the evidence of man also right in front of you with the skyscrapers. And there's that, and if it's a great night, you have also some stars overhead too that aren't too blotted out by the lights. And there's a silence and a peace about it. And also there's water underneath you, and you're on this bridge. And you have this feeling of elevation. At least I'll say it. I've had this a feeling of elevation and peace and connection in an earthy way to what's around me, and also something in my aesthetic sensibility and the pleasure that comes from that is tickled. And even though there's no sound, there's a hum within you. Now, that's a very long way to say I had a transcendent experience. Yeah, I was about to say. So, you could say, if you were writing it out, which we'll get to, the Alyosha Epiphany. Yeah. If you were writing it out, you would want to go that direction. Right. You would want to get to the detail of feeling and emotion and what surrounds you. Because it's more poetic, and you can really get the reader right there with you. Or you can take yourself right there. And then when you read it back and you're editing, sorry, I'm speaking as if I was writing this out, then, you know, it should pleasure you to read what you wrote. And even if it's just a diary entry, or even if it's just you thinking of the memory to yourself, the memory becomes more vivid and it enriches you the more detail you have. But in just in conversation, you know, it's much easier to say, oh man, it was like spiritual, it was transcendent out there.
Religious,
right.
Spiritual experience.
Right. Because even with the long narrative, like the cherry on top that makes it like understandable is when you say transcendent or spiritual or religious, because it implies that higher ground. You can describe the higher ground, what it feels like to be there, but like there is kind of a necessity of just establishing it.
Yeah.
And so that is why I think it's really, really hard to talk about the experience of life on earth and consciousness without pulling stories and images and language from religion. The most readily available Dostoevsky, and for us is, I'll say, Judeo-Christian, because a lot of the a lot of the stuff when I'm non-practicing, so I'm always wondering exactly what I'm encountering, but a lot of the like scriptural readings in synagogue services, temple services that I've been to, they also have the same like mystical overlay. They're getting at the same questions, and they have a similar description, obviously, especially the Old Testament, as the Christian faith. It makes perfect sense, obviously.
Yeah.
I'm saying nothing groundbreaking there. So that was all said to defend the part of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, and really any author who uses the most available religion to them to help describe soulful experience. Because without religious citation, I guess I would say, you kind of have to like write your own religion in order to get at that part of consciousness that is so ultimately mysterious to us. And it's like, we're constantly, I feel like at least a part of everyone's life is trying to discover paths towards that higher plane, and what it's like. What does a day look like in that higher plane? Because it can't be every single moment. Like, so at some moment you're gonna like take a crap.
Yeah, no, like
you're gonna.
Yeah,
you have to do the mundane as well.
Yeah,
and some days you're not there with it. But the whole point of this kind of thing is to discover the paths that can lead you there, and also then beyond that, it's like, well, if I'm taking these paths, I'm making an effort to take these paths, what is the impact on my immediate world and the world in the broader world?
Right.
So, if you are a Christian, it's probably worth it to consider that this is an extremely rich text for everyone, and that it's probably, as much as your faith will allow, probably worth taking the religious references in as abstract ways you possibly can. If you are on the other side of things and have renounced organized religion, it's probably worth remembering that there is undoubtedly a mystical part of consciousness in our life, and that it behooves one
of my favorite words,
to try to distill Christian imagery through the prism of understanding transcendent experience more than literal facts on the ground. And then actually what I found is that you can, though you don't need to attend church necessarily, or have a fundamental pattern of behavior that lines up with organized religious dictates, your spiritual life can really gain momentum and a broader horizon through a deeper acceptance of the wisdom and symbolism that comes with religion. I've talked for a while now, Sam.
Oh yeah.
And I want you to kind of go on your own wing here for a second.
Well, I kind of want to just keep going with what you're saying.
Okay.
So, having a philosophical understanding of these transcendent, religious, spiritual experiences, having a more philosophical, a more not necessarily non-spiritual, non-Christian way of looking at it, but just a more secular way of looking at it, a way of thinking about it, you become, in some ways, you become a better Christian, because a big part of Christianity is evangelizing. And it's funny that we did this when, based on my age and just like how kind of new the world was to us, even though we were like, around 16 to 18 doing choir tours, we would go out, like we went to New Orleans and we, met people on the street, like people who were homeless, people who were, downtrodden. We went to them and we gave them Bibles and we gave them water, like cold water, because it was really hot in New Orleans. Like, if you've ever been there, it was in the middle of the summer. It's like a summer choir tour, right? Well, if you go to these people and you only speak to them in purely religious terms, and you like say, well, you have to believe in God to go to heaven. Well, God is the source of all things good, like, because that's some of the stuff you're taught. And I'm not trying to critique Christianity or the way Christianity is taught to young people, but it is taught in a way that you recite it. There's an orthodox. There's a way of looking at it. It says this in the book that
seems to not be unique to Christianity.
Yeah, it's not unique to Christianity. It's kind of a religion thing. Even
a political religion thing.
Yeah, that too.
Okay, anyway,
but it just goes back to what we were talking about when it comes to listening. When you look at the world in as many ways as you can, when you listen to people and you listen to what they've gone through, you start to realize that love, understanding, goodness can come from a lot of places. It doesn't have to be one particular way. It doesn't have to be directly from our Christian God, not from the Islamic God, not from the Jew God. No, just the Christian God. Because that's
mean Yahweh and Allah.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? And you start to realize it's like, oh man, like this this person, this other human being is just as unique and has had just as difficult or more difficult of a life as I have.
Or meaningful.
Or meaningful, not necessarily just difficult, but meaningful. And if you go, and that's the thing, like when I was like when we were going to these people, like a lot of things, you have to have more tools than just, you know, handing them a Bible and being like, I believe in God, you know, because there's just so much more to it than that. And I'm not explaining myself well here, but basically, I think it's more important. I think being more spiritual in a way that wasn't necessarily Christian has made me a better Christian, has made me think I can be more Christ-like to others, because I've looked at Christ as a model of someone to live my life, but not necessarily like the only source of goodness in my life. It's a tool. Prayer is a tool for meditation. It gets you to a place mentally where you're able to be open and receptive to other people. It gets you out of your, even though you literally are thinking and you're like calming down, it gets you out of your head actually, and helps you be more present in what you're doing. And that's another thing you were saying, oh, you can't do every single thing in your life in this complete like Zen mindful state, like taking a dump. But sometimes it's good to
you have moments, you have like stretches or moments of the banal.
Yeah, and there's also times when you got to multitask. You're listening to something, you're cooking, you're on the phone, you're doing all these things at once, and sometimes it's good to just, and this is something I've been doing recently, it's been helping me actually. When I eat, I eat. I don't look at my phone, I don't read. I used to read and eat and it was fine, but eventually it got to the point where it's like, I'm gonna do one thing at a time. I'm going to read, I'm going to eat, I'm going to be present in this moment.
Yeah.
But now I'm just talking about a lot of things that aren't necessarily the book. But
so we can outside, but there's a downside to the Alyosha life and the Christ life. Yes, the cross was a downside.
Crucifixion downside.
But actually, that's kind of where I'm going with this. Is that the tough part about human nature, which he gets at in the book several times, maybe the Grand Inquisitor most specifically, is that for someone who does have a rich spiritual experience, for reasons that I can't quite put my finger on, it's often met with a laughter and a mockery. And that happens to Alyosha.
Yeah.
In the book. There's also an unfortunate vulnerability, I would say, to it. Like, one wants to be vulnerable, I think, to a certain, or like earnest to a certain degree, but it's like when you do that, like, you know, the opportunity to trespass against that is, it's given out often, and I don't know if people purposely step on it, but they do. Not everyone. I'm not being very specific with that, but
you open yourself up to criticism when you do that, because they know, oh, he's not going to fight back. He's not going to
There's that, but there's also like a skepticism of goodness.
Yes, I know what you're saying.
like there's there's always a questioning, like, well, they can't possibly be that good, so why did they do that?
Right.
Or there's like or maybe it comes more from the self. I remember Sam Harris doing a podcast with somebody. I don't remember who it was, but I remember her saying, Harris is very spiritual. And he talks a lot about the present moment and transcendent experiences. And I guess in all of this language, over the last 2 centuries, there's been a term that's been thrown in. The term is self-actualization, to be self-actualized, which my understanding is that our understanding of it is a little bit marred from the, I think Maslow is the first one to use that terminology. I think it's been a little bit marred from what his original intent was when he said self-actualize. But I guess to say it, from my understanding of it, is that your like, some basic needs are met, some relationships have been established that feed you, there's purpose in what you do, like,
Right.
with most of the hours of your day, you have some conception and definitive idea of what spiritual experience is. And enough of those things equals a self-actualized person. Now,
Right.
this has been distilled down to a hierarchy of needs, which is what I
Like the pyramid.
Yes.
Right.
And I've understood that to be a marring of it.
Right.
And I don't know what podcast I was listening to where somebody was talking about that, but it's my takeaway from that podcast that the pyramid is a little bit too rigid in terms of what it means to be self-actualized. Anyway, the point of all that is to say that on Sam Harris's podcast, this lady, who I think was a journalist, said, "Yeah, I don't need to be self-actualized. I don't want this spiritual, whatever."
Oh yeah, I remember this now.
And I guess that it struck me, because it's like, for me, it could be a temperament thing, because for me it's like that, the idea of being able to say that, like, yes, even though I want to continue improving in life, like right now, the arrows are 90% or more pointing in the right direction. Now, at this moment in time, you can't say that, but one day I would love to be able to say that. That would be awesome. But to hear someone say, I don't know what to do with it exactly. But in the same way that I don't know what to do with the presence of an earnest soul, and then somebody or somebody's just kind of, without much thought, just kind of stepping on it. And that's what happens to Alyosha. That's kind of what happened to Jesu Christu.
Nice, using the Latin. Nice.
So yeah, there's a weakness that comes with it. A weakness that comes,
meekness,
Yes.
if you will.
Right. So there's a downside to it. Now, we've only discussed Alyosha. There are 4 brothers. The book is called Brothers Karamazov for a reason. Now, I thought about this too before our discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I read this somewhere or heard it on a podcast. One of the two. But it's worth thinking of the 4 brothers as pieces of Dostoevsky's personality. Or, if that is if that's a mistaken analysis, I'll say it this way. the artist is somebody who has a specific kind of temperament. And you'll know exactly where I'm plagiarizing all this from. That temperament has more emotional experience and perhaps more clear emotional experience along the breadth of the different ones that they have. And through this, they generally have a greater understanding of different personalities, and they can also then their lived experience might have more there might be more interests in their life. There might be wildly disparate behaviors in their life. There may be like these kind of moments of obsession that jump from one subject to another over time. One piece of evidence that, in fact, the artistic temperament includes like a broader and deeper understanding of human psychology is that there's this very tight link between like Shakespearean text, Dostoevsky, and what psychologists say and reference.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that the understanding and study of human experience has been put forward most significantly by writers and or artists who can highlight or illuminate a wide swath of humanity, and they can do it in a very deep and specific way. So, you'll find Shakespeare has characters all over the place in terms of temperament, age, sex, mood at a given moment, and he just is right on the money with their thought process.
Mm-hmm.
And Dostoevsky is the same way. Now, because they're the central characters, and because they are all like similar but different from each other, I kind of suspect that all four brothers they're like four parts of Dostoevsky.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond just because there are definitely personalities I feel like where an artist can say, yes, I totally understand that, and I have none of that in me.
Yeah.
But I feel like these four, I think he's doing an experiment on his own psyche.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
So with Alyosha, you have the follower of Christ.
Yes.
With Ivan, you have the truthful skeptic.
Right.
Truthful, I mean that by saying he's a huge skeptic, but he doesn't falsify. He doesn't play the game that Smerdyakov plays.
Right.
So Ivan is a skeptic in the sense that he's always searching for truth and spirituality and where they're overlapping, and he can't quite figure it out. And so he is the devil in his mind.
Yeah.
Smerdyakov.
Oh, is that where the accent is?
I think so, yeah.
That's why Russian is so hard. You just have to know. It's like, oh, Brothers Karamazov, not it's like, oh, it's Smerdyakov. It's like, gosh. Anyway,
I'll say this though, like Ivan's success as a as a gifted skeptic of sincere, with a sincere aim at truth, even if he isn't always saying what he himself thinks, he is putting forward theories that come from a sincere place, I feel like.
Yes.
And he's very intelligent. And this wins him the attention of men, I would say, because he's established already in publications at the time that we meet him in the book.
That's right.
And he's either in high regard or no, he's see, men are attracted to his ideas, but the liberals scoff at him and the religious hate him.
Right.
Because often the heterodox thinker, it seems to be a timeless experience for a heterodox thinker,
right,
of Ivan's caliber. Is that they won't have their home in the resent-laden corner, and that's an unfair character. They won't have their corner in the resent-laden corner, nor will they have it with the fundamentalist corner. Now, those are the extremes, but I also feel like it's a little bit true.
Right.
But he will have followers in the smaller, like, what's the word I want to use? Like, more tempered, a well-tempered, mannered man will follow Ivan with more enthusiasm.
Right.
But the well-tempered man is often not as enthusiastic in their skepticism or their joy as the other halves.
Right.
Smerdyakov is totally resent-laden, and he has his reasons to be, too. He has his reasons. His skepticism comes with the joy of what that skepticism does to a believer, and also the joy of the game playing, the winning of arguments.
Yeah.
So with, for example, there's in the introduction to Smerdyakov's character in the book, Grigory is teaching him the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And Smerdyakov starts smiling, and he's like, so, God invented light on the first day, and the sun, moon, and stars on which day was it? 3 or 4.
Yeah, I think it's the 4th day.
And he goes,
I should know that.
He goes, Grigory, where did the light come from before the 4th day?
Exactly. Oh, man.
Because with anything that's fundamental in
that was
text,
when he was like a little kid, right?
yeah.
God.
Because you can just, you can, and that's, it's the problem of Christianity, which is definitely a part of the book. He's definitely addressing what the problems with Scripture are.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can just take a chisel to it and just, like it doesn't take much.
No.
It literally just takes that and the whole thing fucking crumbles apart.
Oh, man. Where'd the light come from?
And yeah, and then there's Mitya. And Smerdyakov, by the way, is both reviled, but also has a kind of a respect among people.
Right.
But people know that he's got something to him.
Yeah.
Like, everyone kind of knows this. But he's so, like, weaselly that there's also a hate from all of them. It's similarly, but his character also has that family that lives right next to them. They take him in kind of at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like a flirtation or maybe more with the daughter of that family. So they're not so incapable that other humans won't, like, invite them into their lives. Then there's Mitya.
Oh, I love Dmitri.
Dmitri is charismatic. He is the most sensual of the brothers. In that, like, I don't just mean that sexually. I mean he has the most, like, earthy physical experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But he also has these. He's very, very smart. He just doesn't. He does not go down the path of, like, Ivan's scholarly reflection on issues of the current day or life itself. He is much more invested in actual, like, contact with humanity.
Yes.
And
having a good time.
And having a good time. And he's athletic, and this kind of personality. I mean, he's adored by everyone.
Yeah.
But they don't. So the tragedy of his character is that this kind of person, kind of a wild child with capability, there's no shortage of women. There's no shortage of, like, camaraderie with fellow wild men.
Right.
But there's a huge shortage of respect and believability when things go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And his life goes off the tracks even before the death of Fyodor Pavlovich, which is the father, because he's so addicted to sensory experience that any kind of, like, delayed gratification is, like, off the table. Money gone, future gone, career prospects non-existent.
Yeah, he also doesn't really take shit from anybody, so
Right.
that gets him in a lot of trouble.
Yeah,
And
he's explosive in his emotion.
yeah, very, very much so.
So,
Awesome.
yeah, it's a good examination of what each of these kinds of personalities goes through. The follower of Christ, the gifted intellect, the resent-laden trickster,
Yeah.
with intellectual power,
Right.
the charismatic, athletic, brilliant thing with absolutely no forward thinking,
Zero
no
forward
thought of
thinking.
the future.
No.
The sensualist of them, of the brothers, anyway.
The sensualist.
So that's one way to read the book, or at least to take in. And if you don't want to read it as, like, those are Dostoevsky's 4 biggest parts of his personality, which you don't have to. I don't think I did at all, but it's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting examination of how those 4 characters of man play out in the world,
Right.
especially at a crisis, and who's most reliable in the crisis is interesting too.
Mm-hmm.
The book could be broken down. This is something I want to ask you.
Yeah.
It's such a huge book. You can see it's like 776 pages or something.
75?
70. Oh, I think I'm correct. 776.
You did read it twice.
Yeah. But there are multiple books within the book. I don't just mean that he titled them books. I mean that, like, the Father Zosima section,
Yeah.
recalling his life, is a book in and of itself.
Yes.
Like, you could read that separately, and there's just a ton of. That's my favorite part of the book. It's the most spiritual. Maybe that gives an indication of what I needed most when I read it. Because it offers the most life experience in the realm of spirituality, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Grand Inquisitor short story, there is, well, there's the prelude, which is really everything up to, I think, Father Zosima.
Yeah.
Then there's the next part of the book, which is like the main chunk of the book, I would say, which is the Mitya's like chase of Grushenka, how his father is involved or not involved in that chase, his father's death, how Smerdyakov, Ivan, and Alyosha play into everything that happens with it.
Yeah.
The two dueling women, Grushenka and Katya. A couple of other characters. The big moralistic speech of Fetyukovich.
Oh, the defense attorney. Well, I want to say it because
Yeah, defense attorney. Yeah.
just read the book.
And then you have, in that storyline, you have Kolya.
Kolya.
Kolya and the boy, the general's boy.
Ilyushka?
Ilyushka.
Ilyushka and
His dad's name, which is
the captain, right?
Snegiryov.
Yes.
Yes, the captain. And that is a whole story unto itself as
Yeah.
well. Which is actually the conclusion of the book.
The epilogue.
So, Sammy, is there
That's my Christian name.
part
Sammy Joe
Sammy Joe?
from South Carolina.
Is there one of them that stands out to you most?
The characters or the sections of the book?
The parts of the book. At least in the way that I just broke it down.
Right. I really related to Kolya and the young boys and like those relationships. How at first Ilyushka and I'm gonna butcher the names. Kolya and Ilyushka were originally like enemies. Like they're like throwing rocks at each other, like somehow Alyosha.
Well, no, originally Ilyusha.
Oh, I'm getting it backwards. Okay, yes.
And then they.
Right. So they were originally best friends, and then like later on in the book, the friendship kind of like crumbles, but then it comes back together again, and the relationship of Kolya and the rest of his like pack of like dudes, and how Alyosha's involved and how they love him, but also like even though Alyosha was trying to help Ilyusha, he gets stabbed by him, and it's like, who are these freaking like crazy little Russian like jerks, you know? But also, man, Ilyusha's family situation, how his mom is basically invalid and crazy, and how his dad is just a drunk mess, and
that's a theme of Dostoevsky. Every single Dostoevsky book has a dad who's a drunk mess.
A drunk, yeah. There's no way of getting around it. I mean, even Pavlovich, to some degree, is a drunk mess as well.
Some degree.
I mean, it was like what? It was like cognac. Like, oh, only have like 2 glasses.
Yeah.
And then there's like 6 glasses of cognac. It's just he was a little more functional than the captain. Snegiryov. But I
think.
Yeah, I think that part of the book really related to me for some reason. I don't know, I think it brought me back to my boyhood and how, and also even into high school, because I think these kids are like they're younger than that, right?
Yeah,
they're like 12.
Yeah, cusp of middle school.
Cusp of middle school type kids. And it just brought me back to that, those relationships, because some people that I was mortal enemies with in middle school, I became best friends with in high school, and vice versa. Like, it's weird. It's how quickly these things can change based on your social status, based on something you said in class one time, like the whole, what was it, the Troy thing? who founded Troy. And there's that one kid who knows it, but I forgot his name's in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But Dostoevsky just does such a great job of describing all these characters. And yeah, that was the part of the book that it really touched my heart. Obviously, the elder Zosima, that...
Wait, I want to read a quote from that.
Oh, yeah.
This is my favorite quote from that part of the book. It's at the end of it.
Oh, yeah?
This is Alyosha speaking to the boys. You must know that there is nothing higher or stronger or sounder or more useful afterwards in life than some good memory. Especially a memory from childhood, from the parental home. You hear a lot said about your education, yet some such beautiful sacred memory preserved from childhood is perhaps the best education. If a man stores up many such memories to take into life, then he is saved for his whole life. And even if only one good memory remains with us in our hearts, that alone may serve someday for our salvation. Perhaps we will even become wicked later on. We'll even be unable to resist a bad action. We'll laugh at people's tears, and at those who say, as Kolya exclaimed today, I want to suffer for all people. Perhaps we will scoff wickedly at such people. And yet, no matter how wicked we may be, and God preserve us from it, as soon as we remember how we buried Alyosha, how we loved him in his last days, and how we've been talking just now, so much as friends, so together, by this stone, the most cruel and jeering man among us, if we should become so, will still not dare laugh within himself at how kind and good he was at this present moment. That's my favorite part of the... It kind of sums up the whole thing, the whole, like, playing out of what happens between all of them, and what it, like, the meaning of it in life itself. Anyway, you were saying.
But, it's just, the funny thing about this book is that I have so many things underlined, and, it comes to the point where the entire page is just like, I was like, oh, I'm gonna, like, mark this part off, because there's, like, every now and then there's a sentence or something that someone says that's really profound, and it's like, oh, well, it's the whole goddamn, like, chapter. It's the whole page. It's just like, like you said, he had to read that entire thing, because that whole thought was just, there's nothing you can really extract from it. You have to read it, accept it in its totality. There's one thing that, just a small thing that Kolya says. I'm not exactly sure. I have to read a bunch to, like, explain exactly what part it is, but he says Kolya says to Alyosha, oh, how I love you and value you right now, precisely because you too are ashamed of something with me, because you are just like me. Kolya exclaimed in ecstasy. His cheeks were flushed, his eyes shining. And something about that, it's almost like sort of an Adam and Eve thing. It's like, because we both have this shame, we're both in this together, it's like this sharing of human experience. There's a bunch of things that Kolya says that really hit me, but
I didn't know you were so struck by the Kolya part, actually, until now.
Yeah, no, I don't know, something about just, like, remembering, it's, I guess it's because we're adults now, and, like, sorry.
No, it also sounds like Kolya himself was more significant to you than I thought.
Yeah.
What is it about Kolya?
I think it's the fact that Kolya's, I think, struggling with what it really means to be a man. And he knows he's too young to, like, be considered a man. He doesn't have that respect because he's too young. But he's so smart. He's so smart. He's, like, as smart as the math teacher or something, the history teacher.
Smarter, probably.
Smarter than, yeah. He's so smart. He's so capable. But there's also this part of him that's like, he knows it, and it drives him down this path of like megalomania at times, and he can kind of be an asshole. Like he can be tyrannical, kind of like how he was with the dog. Even though it was amazing what he can make, and you'll, if you read the book, which I hope you do, if you're watching this, you'll probably read the book. But like, I don't know, there's something about him, like how able he is, but how he has this chip on his shoulder, how he has the respect of the people around him, but he's so aware of it that he can use it to be tyrannical. And yeah, he's constantly struggling too, because because of his interactions with Alyosha, he has a heart. He looks, even though he, in some ways might be intellectually superior to Alyosha. I don't necessarily think that, but like,
I think he is.
I think he is, actually, yeah. And he looks up to Alyosha. It's like he has something I don't. Like, he has this peace about him. He has this understanding. He's not, you know what I mean?
I was going to say understanding, but you said it first,
Yeah. And Kolya's special. I don't know what to say. It's like he's not like a huge part of the book, but yeah, I don't know. I really related to him, and how like quickly that capability can turn into tyrannical, elitism, and how you need to know.
But he's saved by the example of goodness.
Yes, in Alyosha.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of said my favorite part is Zosima. And what comes out of it is Alyosha's epiphany. I'm going to go ass backwards, actually. The epiphany is the first time I ever read the book. It lasted with me definitely more than anything else in the book. The second time I read the book, I still feel the same way. It's just that, like, because I wasn't reading for the first time, I was able to, like, not have that process of just, like, the first time you're going through it, it's like the act of reading is like trying to figure out exactly what's, like, putting together what you just read and what's happening right now on the page, and trying to be engaged with it. And then the second time going through it, it's more like, okay, well, now I can just kind of savor.
Right.
I know what's going to happen. I don't have to worry about that or keep plot straight, because it's pretty clear in my mind.
Right.
I could just savor the little details. But even after having done that, the Alyosha epiphany is... first of all, it struck me that he was able to capture what a spiritual epiphany is like in words. I don't know if I'd ever read something that hit it quite as hard in the head as how he captures it. The transformative experience, something like that. I've told you about this, I think. Definitely I can identify a not a specific moment, which is how it is for Alyosha, but point in my life where there was definitely a change in character. I have one friend who's known me long enough to have, without me encouraging that observation, described me as having the same intensity, but a lightness that wasn't there before. As in like a not like a floaty lightness, but like a brighter presence.
Right.
And when I read the Alyosha section, I definitely I had felt and been through something similar, and I never read anyone who really, I thought, got that feeling. I didn't even know it was possible. That's how naive I was before I started reading Russian literature, that I didn't know people had written about it in as specific as a way as I had felt it. And I'm even against reading books with the idea that I'm going to relate to this, because I'm a follower of, that's my fundamentalism, is the Nabokov essay. Good readers and good writers. But it jumped off the page at me. It was like, oh my God, he got it. He really, really got it. So this is
sword drills. That's what we called them in church.
Nice.
Like Caleb Copeland, he never lost.
This is the end of book 3. And okay, I'm going to skip past where he walks by the coffin. Okay. He did not stop. Oh, no, I'll start right before that. Will I? I'll start right there.
Right.
He did not stop on the porch either, but went quickly down the steps. Filled with rapture, his soul yearned for freedom, space, vastness. Over him the heavenly dome, full of quiet, shining stars, hung boundlessly. From the zenith to the horizon, the still, dim Milky Way stretched its double strand. Night, fresh and quiet, almost unstirring, enveloped the earth. The white towers and golden domes of the church gleamed in the sapphire sky. The luxuriant autumn flowers in the flower beds near the house had fallen asleep until morning. The silence of the earth seemed to merge with the silence of the heavens. The mystery of the earth touched the mystery of the stars. Alyosha stood gazing, and suddenly, as if he had been cut down, threw himself to the earth. He did not know why he was embracing it. He did not try to understand why he longed so irresistibly to kiss it, to kiss all of it, but he was kissing it, weeping, sobbing, and watering it with his tears. And he vowed ecstatically to love it unto ages of ages. Water the earth with the tears of your joy, and love those tears, rang in his soul. What was he weeping for? Oh, in his rapture he wept even for the stars that shone on him from the abyss, and he was not ashamed of this ecstasy. It was as if threads from all those innumerable worlds of God all came together in his soul, and it was trembling all over, touching other worlds. He wanted to forgive everyone and for everything, and to ask forgiveness. Oh, not for himself, but for all and for everything, as others are asking for me, rang again in his soul. But with each moment he felt clearly and almost tangibly something as firm and immovable as this heavenly vault descend into his soul. Some sort of idea, as it were, was coming to reign in his mind. Now for the whole of his life, and unto ages of ages. He fell to the earth a weak youth, and rose up a fighter, steadfast for the rest of his life. And he knew it and felt it suddenly in that very moment of his ecstasy. Never, never in all his life would Alyosha forget that moment. Something visited my soul in that hour, he would say afterwards, with firm belief in his words. 3 days later he left the monastery, which was also in accordance with the words of his late elder, who had bidden him to sojourn into the world.
I don't know how you got through that. I was like,
oh, as soon as I get to the he rose a weak youth and
I was like,
a weak youth, yeah. I think that thing that's incredible about that is that there's a physical element to this kind of experience, and this is mystical. Let me just relate it to me for a second, because my moment, as it were, came in 2015. And my first moment, because there was also the Mephistopheles thing, but that's another story. Not unlike it, because there were walks in Central Park that were like the dessert of the Meph. Anyway.
Right, yeah.
I was going to this lake Aquabi, and I was going like at sunset every night, and I was getting a paddleboard, and I was in the middle of this water in Lake Aquabi in Iowa. It's a man-made lake. currently drained, but you're surrounded by trees, and you know, when it gets to nighttime, it's just all stars, and there's just the peace of nature, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in a moment where I was really thinking about things. I was in a certain way. I was thinking about where I wanted to start steering my life. It was after the senior year of undergrad. And I can remember just being on the water with myself, and something about being like in touch with it, in that like that cup of nature. How that was like the necessary, as you could say, background for well, it was necessary, like, I don't know, setting for having that kind of an epiphany.
Mm-hmm.
And early on in that quote, you know, he talks about, I need vastness and openness of space.
Right, yeah.
And somehow that vastness, openness of space, and then he throws himself on the dirt, and he needs to be in touch with the physical at the same time that he's having kind of a metaphysical realization in his mind.
Yeah.
It requires, so maybe it's not like physical, psychological, metaphysical. Maybe it's like the mind, physical, and then the metaphysical is like the harnessing of those things.
Yeah.
In a certain way. Of course, that could be way off. But
well,
that's what I get.
I want to say that I had a similar experience. It's like you said, you're listening to Mephistopheles in Central Park. For me, it was I was listening to Divalkura, and it was the end of the opera, like the final aria, Wotan's final aria, and but it was just near the end that, like, after like the fire music comes, because he makes the ring of fire around Brunhilde, but it's like the da 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 da. Just listening to that, being in Central Park, being like part of the earth, but hearing this just like incredible music, and being alone. I mean, not alone. You're never alone here because there's always people around, but like, it was in the middle of the daytime, actually. It wasn't even at night. But it was just this overwhelming feeling of, like, connection with not just humanity, because it was like I was in Central Park, kind of like you described earlier. I think it may have been on that bridge. But you're looking at nature. You're in nature, but you're also looking at a grandiosity of human achievement in this skyline, and you're listening to Wagner. You know, you're listening to some of the greatest music ever composed, and it just struck me like it, just like it says in the book, like he felt like he was cut down. That's what I felt like. The feeling of like being infinitely inspired, but also humbled by what humanity and that can achieve, but also feeling not only connected with humanity, but connected with life itself.
Say inspired and humbled by nature itself.
Yeah, exactly. Like in nature, it's when I say life, I mean like all life, like organic matter, everything. So I've had a similar experience, and it was just like the Wagner, the skyline, the park. It was just it's hard to explain in words, and that's why this guy does it.
Yeah, I was gonna take this one out as well, this quote.
Page 319.
This is 319. It's a short quote, but honestly for me it's more significant than the quote-unquote touchstone philosophical moment 1 page later that we started this with.
Mm-hmm.
If you love each thing, you will... Oh, I'm going to start actually right before that.
Yep, I was about to say, it's like... I was like, we have the same part highlighted.
I'll start actually at the top of the paragraph. Brothers, do not be afraid of men's sin. Love man also in his sin. For this likeness of God's love is the height of love on earth. Love all of God's creation, both the whole of it and every grain of sand. Love every leaf, every ray of God's light. Love animals, love plants, love each thing. If you love each thing, you will perceive the mystery of God in things. Once you have perceived it, you will begin tirelessly to perceive more and more of it every day. And you will come at last to love the whole world with an entire universal love. I'll stop there.
Yeah.
That just, I don't know. That's because again, I find a truth to that in my own experience. Like, but I will say this, that dictate is not necessarily like, it's actually quite a mysterious thing to say love it. Like, it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's why I was talking about like starting off the conversation with the idea of receiving. I think in some ways I just to love it, you have to not love it first. You have to just receive it. I think. I suspect. Io sospetto.
Io sospetto. Sospetto. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Italian diction. They don't even freaking know what's closed and open. God damn it. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that's why an openness of spirit is really a gift first to you and then to the people around you. I don't think you can love each thing without that as a starting point. I could go another route here, which is the temperament route, but I don't want to. I don't know how much, the thing is that this book, there's 776 pages and filled with, there's one quote in here that is so significant that, and we haven't even got to it yet, which is the above all, do not lie to yourself paragraph.
Oh, geez, yeah.
That's on 44.
More crying.
But that one I've used in look at my blog, ZackBrownArt.com. I definitely used that quote in the, I guess you could say, missive to MSM. But it's more than that. It was more than that for me. I guess in a certain way, that thing was like a missive to the whole ideology. But I felt like that quote addressed one of the worst parts of that ideology. Actually, all of Zosima's book does that too. Like because the whole thing with him, to get back to that philosophical touchstone quote, is he concludes that part by saying, if that part of you that is in touch with the mysterious, the physicalized part of that mysteriousness, like something in you dies and goes away. Like if you're not in touch with the small grains of sand, like there's a really great part of you, maybe the best part of you, maybe the part of you most capable of love, dies. And along with that is the lying to yourself. And I just... So
Well, it's like you're saying, that part of you that dies, that has that wonder at small things. It's necessary in your relationships with people as well, because nobody's perfect. In fact, everyone's far from it. So, in order to love someone, you have to find those little things about them that, even if you don't particularly like them, even if you had an abusive, like, bad relationship with them, like, or like, let's say they're in your family and like it wasn't the best growing up, you know, with like maybe your, you know, mom or dad or sister. It's like they're still your family, and you still have to find parts of them, it's like, that you admire.
Well, there's actually some of the I mean, along with the good side that you just highlighted, there's also there's a note of the downside of the Alyosha Christlike love, which is that this is a possibility even in a bad relationship.
Yeah. Yes, that's very true.
And that's yeah. And yeah, sometimes the tragedy is that the open heart, the receptive heart, which ends up being the loving heart, that's the whole theory of the day, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that the one that is not that way in a two-way relationship, if there is one that is not a kind soul necessarily, at that moment of its behavior, it can really, really step on the soul that is able to receive the best parts of it, actually. And because it's so open, then that one that is acting badly in the moment, in addition to the nice parts of it that it presents, it also harms, because it's like throwing everything at it.
Yeah.
So,
like I said, we were saying earlier, it's like when you're that open and receptive, prepare to receive a lot of,
yeah, there's good and bad.
Yeah, bad things as well. It's part of it, but
yeah,
that's love, truth, and sacrifice.
Right. Well, listen, the book's long. We could do this for I could do this for another 4 hours, but
we really could. I mean, it's just, we could have like Anabolic opera or Anabolic Dostoevsky bros. I mean, they could be just like a whole series just on this.
Yeah.
Could have a whole series just on the Grand Inquisitor. There's so much.
Man.
There's so much in this book.
Yeah, we didn't even cover that. That's okay. Yeah. So listen, BK. It's like
BK.
It's
Burger King.
It's a beaut, and it it offers a lot of insight into the human experience, both the very material and what's beyond.
What's beyond?
Let's close on that. Wait, you gotta turn the camera off.
Oh, fine.
That's our whole tradition.
Well, I was gonna. Okay, fine.